Good morning.
Morning, Rabbi.
Morning. All right.
Let's go.
Yes, let's go. Freilach. With the help of Hashem, we are learning ERUVIN Daf Chav Dalid. We are learning the sugya of a karpaf, whether it was circled with a wall for residential purposes, hukaf ladira, whether it was hukaf shaloi ladira. Guys, you should know that this sugya is extremely relevant for all city ERUVIN. The last thing that we learned yesterday, right, beginning of Daf Chav Gimel Amud Beis on top of Chav Dalid, is that we had a braisa that if you have a karpaf and it was bigger than 2 sa, and even though it was hukaf ladira, but if in it there is an area that, for example, we said it was planted as a vegetable garden, so that area is no longer called an area for residential purposes. So if that area is, according to all of the approaches we had in the Gemara we finished yesterday, is more than 2 sa, even though the larger area is hukaf ladira, is much larger, everything becomes invalidated. Because since you cannot carry in that area, that's Yosem Beis Osayim, and everything else is nifratz, completely opened up towards it, nifratz b'meloi l'makayim ha'asr, everything becomes asr. Guys, that would mean that if you have a city eruv, which is around the city, hukaf ladira, but in there is an area that halachically is called an area that's not ladira, and if that area is more than 2 sa, it could theoretically invalidate the entire eruv. And this really is one of the big challenges of making city eruvim. And many times these areas must be left out of the city eruv, not to complicate it, as we are learning. Now we're going to have various scenarios on Daf Chav Dalid. Some of them will be similar to the one that we began on Daf Chav Gimel Amud Beis, which is an area that was hukaf ladira, and then something happened, and a part of the area inside the eruv is now considered shaloi ladira. For example, one area got flooded with water. You cannot live in the water. So, a water park in a city, that can invalidate the whole city eruv, perhaps. And then you have the opposite case where you have an area that was hukaf shaloi ladira, and you want to change its designation. So the nakud of the whole daf will be, is just kavana will not help. So you have to not only intend to start using this area for what halacha will consider for residential purposes, but you have to somehow re-enclose the area. So the question will be, what will be the minimum amount of work that you need to do to re-enclose it? I mean, obviously, if you knock the eruv down and you rebuilt it, you knock the walls down and you rebuilt it, so then you re-enclosed it. But again, we're trying to avoid extra work, and we're going to conclude Daf Chav Daled Amud Beis with a very interesting case, like we just mentioned, where we're going to find a relatively simple solution to halachically re-enclose an area that originally was shaloi ladira, and through that little act, we'll be able to be mated that entire location. Okay, we're going to start on Daf Chav Daled Amud Aleph, 9 lines from the top of the Amud by the 2 dots. We are referring back to a braisa we had on Daf Chav Gimel Amud Beis. The case was a karpav that's more than 2 sa, that originally was hukaf ladira, but now you made a shinui. So the braisa said that if you planted nizra rubai, if you planted, let's say, vegetables, and with all of the diyukim that we learned yesterday, then that area is considered a non-dira area, and it could invalidate everything. However, the braisa says, that's what we are referring to by the 2 dots, nita rubai, but if you planted trees in the majority of the area that was hukaf ladira, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't take away its dira designation. It remains like a chatzar. A chatzar is taka outdoors. In a chatzar, many people have trees. It's actually something that's advantageous for a living area. It gives you shade, and therefore umutir, it continues to be permitted. So on that, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Avimi, that when do we say that if you plant trees in an area in a karpav, Shehukaf ledira, it does not change its designation. It's only v'husha asuyin, it's tablois, only if the trees are planted in rows, not difficulting people walking around there. It's a seder. There's a row of trees, and then there's the area in between the rows of trees. And indeed, that's why it doesn't change its designation. But if the trees are planted randomly, like for example in a forest, making it a lot more difficult to get around there because you'll have to be constantly walking around trees, that is already considered an area that is shaloyu kafladira. And as we mentioned, if you make a shinoi inside a larger eruv area, right, you plant a vegetable garden, that area is considered shaloy ladira, and it affects all else. However, Rav Nachman Amar, no, he's more lenient. It's tablois, trees, even if they are not planted in rows, people still live amongst trees. It does not change its designation, and the area remains an area in which it is permitted to carry, even if you have an enclosed area that's many times more than Beis Hasayim. As we learned yesterday, we paskin that if it's hukaf lidira, it can be as large as you want. There is no upper limit. Says the Gemara story. Mar Yehuda, the master Yehuda, Ikla, he went lebei Rafuna bar Yehuda to the house of Rafuna bar Yehuda. And Chazinu Lahanu, the loy avidi itztablois, and he saw this very large area. Always, it's an area that exceeds 2 sa, because if an area does not exceed 2 sa, if it has halachic partitions, that's what we have been learning. I don't care whether it's hukaf ladira or loy hukaf ladira, it's enclosed. Midoiraisa b'chlal, it's all reshus hayachid. But he saw an area there that was more than 2 sa, that he knew was originally hukaf ladira. Narvos, then now he saw many trees planted there, and they were not planted in an organized fashion. And nevertheless, his household members were carrying there. So that if it's not, it's tablois, it changes its designation. Now it's considered loyu kafladira. Amalei, no, I know what he says, but I don't paskin like him. I paskin like Rav Nachman, and Rav Nachman does not differentiate any type of planting of trees, even if it is not in rows, will not take away its dira status. That area is still considered an area in which people can comfortably reside. It says the Gemara. Omar Rav Nachman, Omar Shmuel. Now we're going to go into an opposite scenario. Atkan, beginning on Chav Gimel Amid Beis, it was a karpav more than Sosayim, Shehu Kafladira, and now you changed its designation for not Dira. Now it's the opposite. If you have a karpav that's more than 2 Sosayim, that originally Shaloyu Kafladira, and now you want to change its designation. So it's not enough to say, well, now I'm deciding that open area that has mechitzas, I'm going to start doing what halacha considers residential activities. That intention, and even doing those activities in themselves, will not change the status that you may not carry their midrabanan. Because since when the walls were put up, then originally it was shaloi hukaf ladira, you have to re-enclose that area. No, you don't have to knock all the walls down, but you have to do a halachically significant rebuilding of the walls. So here says the Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel, the solution, invalidate the partitions halachically, not by knocking them all down, but as we continuously have been learning, at the moment you have a breach, that the width of the opening is more than 10 amas, the halal is more than 10 amas, it's no longer called a Pesach, it's called a pirza, and a pirza in partitions invalidates the partitions. So now the goydroi, now reclose it, put up the fence, umamidoi, and you don't have to close the entire breach. If the opening was a bit more than 10, only bring it back to 10 or less, umamidoi aleset. And you're doing that with a kavana, that's important, obviously. The Gemara doesn't have to mention that. You are intending now that this area will be used for what halacha considers ladira. So now, so you don't have to rectify all of the walls, You have to just halachically invalidate the walls, and when you revalidate them, it is for dira umutter. Okay. So they asked in the yeshiva, what happens if you don't create a breach of more than tanamis at once? You do it piecemeal, you do it piece by piece, but 1 second, it's not that today you knock down an amma and then tomorrow another amma. Well, that's called at once, because at the end, you're going to have a total breach of more than tanamis. That was not the boya. The boya is if you knock down a piece of the wall and you fixed it, l'shem dira, then tomorrow you knock down another adjacent section of the wall, an amma, and you fixed it. Oh. And he did this 10 times. 10 times plus a bit. In other words, if you would have had all of those breaches together, it would have created a pirza yoiser meyaser. But de facto, it didn't happen that way, because by the time you broke the second little opening, you already fixed yesterday's breakage. So what do we say? Does it have to be breached more than 10 at once? Or could we say that since this section of the wall, we're speaking about a section that's all adjacent, connected, is all new, and if you take away all of the new, you would have an opening more than 10. So that's also good enough, because that means that halachically, the wall was re-enclosed, and it was re-enclosed lidira, so it rectified the whole entire area. So Omar lay that lav hainu detran, is this not like the Mishnah that we learned in Kalim? We just learned these dinim not that long ago in Shabbos, and that is called klei balabatim shiurim kirimayim, some gavaldike hilchas tuma, that for something to become tamei and for the tuma to continue, that item has to have a status of a keli. If something halachically is not called a keli, number one, it cannot become tamei. And number two, if when it was a keli, it did become tamei, if it loses its halachic status of a keli, it automatically loses its tuma. So if you have a receptacle, if you have a bowl, and it has a hole in it, so the halacha is that if it belongs to balabatim, if you have a balabayis, is not that particular as much as a professional. A professional, especially if the business is to sell those kalim, even a smaller blemish ruins its status of a kalim, obviously, because you can't sell it. However, if you're a balabas, even if you originally had a bowl and you would use it for one sort of item, if it has a hole in it, you're not going to throw it out that quick. You're going to use it for something else. However, once it has a hole that is so large that a pomegranate can fall out of it, it's called kemaitzerimine, then even though it's a keli of balabatim, it loses its status of a keli and it loses its tumah. Okay, that is the mission. And on that, Chizkiah wondered what happens if first it had a hole only kemaitzezayis, much smaller than kemaitzeriman, and usatamai, and the owner fixed it. And then v'chazer v'nikev, and then right adjacent to the first hole that is now fixed, there's another hole. V'nikev kemaitzezayis usatamai. Now there's a final maitzizayis hole if you ignore the new pieces of the keli that you put in there to fix the original breach. It would now be a total of kamaitzidimayim. What is the din, right? And on that, Rabbi Yechanan, my friends, was a Talmud of Chizkiah. So the student tells Chizkiah, his teacher, Rabbi, you already told us, you're asking this inquiry, you yourself told us the response. How did Chizkiah say the response? So really, Rabbi Yechanan is reminding a shiur that Chizkiah gave also in Mishnah Yiskelim regarding Hilchas Tumah, but not about a keli that has a hole, right? But regarding a sandal. The sandal of old would have on both of its sides a ear-like flap, a piece of leather, and that piece of leather was folded on top of the foot, upon which they used to put the laces. So it was just aside of you just having a sole, there were two, what the halacha calls oznayim, that would come out. If a sandal lost one oizen, it's still usable, so it does not lose its status of being a sandal. If a sandal loses both of oznayim, it was completely non-usable and it loses its status. Now, another detail regarding sandalim, And that is that until now, we were just speaking about B'chlal, can something become Tamei? If it's not a Keli, it doesn't become Tamei. If it was a Keli and it loses its status of a Keli, it loses its Tumah. There's a detail regarding certain people, let's say a Zav, that not only has the Koyach to impart Tumah, but if the Zav sits upon, lays upon, or here puts his weight upon something that was made to receive the weight of the Zav, it becomes just as tummy as the Zav. The Zav is an Av, Tumas Midras, that item also becomes an Av. That includes sandalim or shoes. That means if a Zav puts his feet into shoes, since it was made to receive the feet of the Zav, it requires Tumas Midras. So says the Mishnah, sandal, if only if one of these flaps get torn off, as we mentioned, even though it's a defective sandal, but it's still usable, it doesn't lose its tight scaling. And then what happened? V'tikna, there's all a Mishnah. And then you fixed it. So even though there is something new to it, it's not that it became bottled and you made something new. It remains tamei midras in the case where it was tamei before anything got torn off. But now says the Mishnah, if now the second ear was torn off, even though you fixed the second ear, now we say tar min hamidras, it loses its status of midras. Why did it lose it? Because when the first one was taken off, even though it was refixed, when the second one falls off, we say now that this sandal lost both of its ears, not at the same time. It became Tamei Midras before anything negative happened to it, before any of the ears got taken off. Now we say, no, the original Tumah left, it's clear. However, another nuance, even though the sandal loses its Tumah Midras, Avol Tamei Maga Midras, it still remains Tamei on a lower level. We consider the sandal something that touched Tumas Midras. How did the sandal touch Tumas Midras? So there's different ways of looking at it. Either it touched itself when it changed its own status. Don't forget, now it's fixed. Don't forget that when the second ear fell off, there was another ear there. You understand? If a sandal loses both of its ears at the same time, then not only will the remaining soul not be Tumas Midras, it won't even have Tumas Maga Midras because it's nothing. It's not considered a Keli. It's not considered a shoe. Here, at the end of the day, it didn't lose both of its ears at the same time. So when it lost its second ear, it did have the first ear reattached. So it's still considered a Keli. Yes, it loses its status of Midras, but we consider the original sandal touching the new sandal. So it's Maga Midras. Some people learn that the ear itself, before it got ripped off, which was part of the original sandal, touched whatever remained off it. So whether it's touching itself, whether it's touching the second ear, bottom line is that it loses Tumah Midras. That was the Mishnah that Chizkiah taught to his Talmidim. And when he taught it, Allah, whether it's you said or we asked you, Chizkiah, this is Rabbi Yechanan saying, I don't understand. Why is it that if it loses one ear, the sandal doesn't lose Tumas Midras? Why? I know why. Because the Hakaima Shnia. Because a sandal with only one ear is still Toida Skeli. So the question is, when it lost the second ear, at that time, that was the case of the Mishnah, the first ear was reattached. It never had a moment where it had no ears. So why does it completely lose Tumas Maga? And you, Chizkiah, told us, V'amrat lan Allah. I'll tell you why. True that at the same time, it never lost both ears, but on the other hand, when it became Tamei, it was a sandal with two ears. Now, neither of the ears that were there originally continuously stayed on. You have, so to say, two new ears. So we say Panim Chadashus Bo'olakan. Since neither of the ears, right, that were on the sandal while it became Tamei is now on it, so we consider it a new sandal. And therefore, Hachinami, Padam Chadashas Bo'olakan. So Rabbi Yechanan responded to Chizkiah, you asked a question regarding the bowl. It loses its tumah. What happens if it's Kamoitzi Zayis and you fix it, then right adjacent another Kamoitzi Zayis, same concept. If at the end of the day, a size of Kamoitzi Rimain together is new, it's Panam Chadashas. If it's Panam Chadashas, it loses its tumah. This is what Rabbi Yechanan told Chizkiah, and Chizkiah.
Rabbi,
let me just finish reading. And Chizkiah tells him that Kari Alei, that Chizkiah said regarding Rabbi Yechanan, wow, leis dein bar inish. This is not even immortal. This is so great. Or he says, Kegoin dein bar nash. This is a person. So now we are just reapplying it to our case regarding the wall. And even if you don't have a breach at the same time of more than 10, since one piece of the wall that was knocked down and refixed is adjacent to the other, and sum total, we have now a rebuilt wall of Yesed Me'esed, it's considered you re-enclose the area. Now it was done Ladira, and now the entire area is a karpav shehukaf Ladira in which you may carry. Yes, Danny.
So then, just to clarify, can you hear me right now?
Mm-hmm.
So just to clarify, in all these cases, you're saying that the breach or the hole that's repaired has to be exactly next to the next hole. So if it's 10 amas, you're doing one, and then you do another one, and then you do another one.
Yes,
and amas touching each other, or it can be one and then.
No. Okay, right. Let me just speak this out. You see, what invalidates a wall? We learned many didn't. The pirza yesed meyesed is only if the pirza is all together. Because if you have many openings, then we have another rule. What was the other rule? It has to be amud meruba laparetz, whether it's amud kaparetz and machlekas hamayroim. So I want to just say that many of the Rishonim say, Danny, it's your logic just applying it in the right place. That there's another way of rectifying that area by breaking it down in a way that it becomes parutz meruba la'oimit. Now, that can be a lot more than 10 amas. If it's a very large area, it's Yosem Abeis Osayim. And there, you're right, there it doesn't have to be adjacent. And here is the same question. It doesn't have to be parutz at one time. As long as sum total, if you're going to put together all of the new pieces, had you not fixed it, it would have been parutz. Now you got yourself a new wall. But if you're speaking about a pirza yesed me'esed, the whole definition of yesed me'esed means it's in the same place. Because if I have a little breach and I have wall and I have another breach, that's called a Pesach and a Pesach and a Pesach. Okay, weiter. Omar Rav Kahana. Now, if you remember, we already spoke about this concept of a rechava. A back lot was something relatively common. The definition of a back lot is that no bias has an opening into this property. So it was normally put at the end of a mavui. It was used for storage. But since a home did not open directly to it, normally a rechav is called an area that's not enclosed lidira. Now, on the other hand, don't forget, Chevra, we don't paskin the way Rashi learns the Shita Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, that even if a karpat is hukaf ledira, if it's more than beis osayim, you may not carry. We do not paskin that way. But just remember, an area that's hukaf ledira, I don't care how big it is. An area that is shaloi hukaf ledira, if it's not bigger than beis osayim, it's also good. But if you have a rechava, just remember that by definition is normally called shaloi hukaf ledira. So that's the case over here. That the rechava sha'achoyre habatim. And obviously, we're speaking about a rechava that's bigger than beis osayim, ein metaltalin boy, ela b'dal adamas, because by default, even though it's near, it's shaloi hukaf ledira doesn't have to be out there in the field. It's adjacent to your mavui, but that's it's like a storage area. It's a place that people don't do any residential functions over there. It's called shaloi hukaf ledira. Now, for Amar Rav Nachman, same concept. What happens if you want to change its designation? In Pasach li Pesach, if you now take this rechava area that really has a wall, one of the walls of the rechava is a wall to a house, but there's no direct opening. If you make a new Pesach from a house into the rechava, now mutal taltal bekulay. Now you are allowed to carry in the rechava. That Pesach changes its designation, like we're learning right now. Just kavanah is not enough. But doing something that halachically will say, you re-enclosed it. Look, a Pesach is called you re-enclosed it. Because Pesach matiroi. However, says the Gemara, this is only said elam she Pesach ulabasayfukaf. You can only do that if before you fully close the area, you already made that Pesach. So therefore, there was a dira function in that area before you finish building the wall. So the finishing of the building of the wall was now l'shem dira. But if it was fully circled, it was already at a chava. And now all you did was you opened up a Pesach. That's not enough. Why is it not enough? That's what we're learning. That just a mental change is not enough. Even if you decide to use a ladira and you de facto use a ladira, it's also not enough. You have to re-enclose it. Making a Pesach is not called re-enclosing it. It's just called making a Pesach. So you need to make the Pesach before you finish enclosing it. Says the Gemara, why did I even need that? If it's only good when you made the door and only afterwards did you finish closing off the Rechava area, then of course it was hukaf l'shem dira. So the Gemara says no. Loy, that sricha the isbei beidari. You have to just know how people lived. People used to have like a mavui. Then in the back, many times there was a Rechava. Behind the Rechava, that was the case that he was referring to. There was a granary. A granary, in other words, that the people that lived in the homes needed a shortcut, the door that they made from their house into the Rechava, which would lead them closer to the granary, could be they were not even intending to expand their residential functions in the Rechava. They only made the door, that's what you could have said, to go get to the granary. So now the tema adata the beidari avida. That's the only reason why there was a door. So that was this chiddush that as long as you did not finish circling the Rechava, a Pesach makes the Rechava residential. We don't say that the only reason why a door is there is for you to get to whatever was behind the Rechava. We don't say that. We say that no. You also did it for a shortcut, but when you have a house and you have a door, not into the street, you're going to end up using that area also for residential purposes. So as long as you didn't yet closing that area, it was not fully enclosed, so the finalization of closing it, when you made it from not enclosed into halachically enclosed, there was already a door, that's called hukaf l'shem dira. It doesn't have to be the whole hukaf, but it has to be enough of the hukaf that prior to it, it wasn't a halachic partition. Now you finalize the partition, now you're good. Next case. Karpav, Yoiser Mibeis Osai. Hukaf Ladira. Hukaf Ladira, we learned, again, we paskin, you are allowed to carry in it. But now, unlike the case in the Brais and Daf Chav Gimel Amud Beis, that you planted it with vegetables or you planted it with trees, now something natural happened. Vinismali Mayim, filled up with water, flooded in over there. Now, the question is, that area where it's filled with water, you can't do residential functions over there. And don't forget, like we mentioned, this is only Ge'el Maisa. Does this ruin everything? Don't forget, what did we learn on top of the Amid? That if the area filled with water is considered Shaloi Ladira, if that area is more than 2 sa, L'kula Alma, even according to Rav Shimon, for sure according to the Rabbanan, you can't carry anywhere. Because since in that area, that's Chashif, that's called Shaloi Hukaf Ladira. So therefore, that area is the area in which you may not carry. The other areas are Nifrats B'Maloye to it. So even if there's no Eruv Chatzeres issue, even if you can carry from a Chatzer to a Karpav, even according to Rav Shimon, so what? If it's Nifratz B'Maloy L'Mekayim HaAsr, you can't carry anywhere. So what is the din? So Shavar Rabbanan L'Meimar, that since you cannot use the water area for residential functions, Kizeroyim Dami, it's as if you planted vegetables, which is what we learned in the Braisa, and therefore everything becomes prohibited. However, Amalahu Rav Abba, either it was Avua, Derav Berei, Derav Misharshia, or it is Amalei Rav Abba, Achua, Derav Berei Misharshia, or you have the Yavitz that it's all Rava, but here it says Hachem in the Shmei Rava. That no, that water is not a problem. Mayim, a large body of water inside an even larger area that was Hukaf Ladira. The water area is as if you planted trees there. In other words, it does not nullify its residential status, and therefore, Vishadi, everything remains an area in which it's permitted to carry Daf Chav Daled Amud Beis. Now that's, you can say thank God, but hold on, Daf Chavdal Adamid Beis adds a meimar, an important qualification. V'hu, only if the water that is in that the new water that's in this area is the chazyon litashmishta, if it's fit for use. What does it mean, water fit for use? Big machlokes Rashi and other Rishonim. And guys, this really affects every city Eruv. Every city Eruv. Right? Look in the LA, inside the Eruv. I'm assuming, maybe you guys from Los Angeles can correct me. Are there not parks that have bodies of water inside the city Eruv? I think there are.
There for sure are. They're definitely
sure
larger than Beis Hosayim, for sure.
There you go. Beis Hosayim is nothing. It's 5,000 square amas. And again, that's the whole word. If it's inside the Eruv, it has to be chazin l'tashmishta. Now Rashi says l'tashmishta means drinkable water. Let me just finish reading. L'shasiyah. Because if the water is drinkable for people, then the ein lo chadira ma'ula mizu. According to Rashi, it's very chamor that if the water that gathered is not water that's fit for drinking, even though it's water that's good for irrigating, even if the water beautifies a park, which is how many people say it's nice, it's visually nice. But according to Rashi, it's not good enough. If it's not drinkable water, so we consider the water area an area that is shaloi hukaf ladira, just that area. And now that everything else is directly open to it, it's asir and it asers everything else. Again, other Rishonim say the chazin l'tashmishta doesn't have to be roy l'shasiyah. And I know that Rav Moshe wrote about it. I think it was Venegea, a practical Eruv. He brought from somebody Shainim that if it enhances the beauty of a location, it's also considered residential purpose because it's nice to be around the body of water, which is all hetadim that we use not to allow any body of water within a large Eruv to passel the entire Eruv. Aval, however, if there's no tashmish, we're going to Gemara Rashi. If the leichazim l'tashmishta, then we don't say it's like trees. We say it's like a gina. And again, that's the word. If it's small, it's bottle. If it's miyut, and that's the thing that we learned at the end of yesterday. The moment it's more than 2 sa, it's not bottle. It's a chashuv location. It becomes asur. Everything else is it's nifratz b'maloye to the water area, and everything else becomes possible. Amar Ravashi. Let's go more. That this area retains its residential status. Thank God. It's elo she'ein ba'oin koyosim bebeis hosayim. That's only if the deep part of this new gathering of water is not 10 tfachim. That's called ba'oin koy. That the area that's 10 tfachim itself doesn't cover more than 2 sa. Aval im yesh ba'oin koyosim bebeis hosayim. We're not paskening from the Gemara, but look at what we're saying over here. That if this water gathering has an area that's 10 tfachim deep, and that area of 10 tfachim deep in itself is more than 2 saw, so water fit for drinking, you don't need such a deep body of water. So that's not residential, and therefore asur gavaldik. However, the Gemara says on this last statement, v'lav milsa, I don't care how deep it is. If the water is royal l'tashmishta, chazyon l'tashmishta, so what if it's deep? People are using it. And the proof is, mida dahavya karya the peta, gavaldik proof. What happens if you have in a large karpaf, in a large area, which will be a city edu, shahukaf ladira, but in that area you have a big mound of produce. We don't say, and the mound is 10 tvachim tall, and let's say that it's such a large granary, such a large gathering of produce that it covers more than 2 sa. No one is going to say, ooh, now this area is invalidated and it invalidates everything else. No, it's food. It's more than 10 tvachim deep and it's covered more than 2 sa. So what? People need to eat. So in a living area, you have a pile of food. You have a storage of food. So who cares if water is deep 10 tvachim? Makes no difference. So the Gemara rejects that which Ravashi says. Okay. And today we're going to learn the final case. Now here, again, whoever has a picture should put
Rabbi, can I ask you a quick question?
Go ahead.
It seems like Rava made this comparison between the trees, the area with the trees, and the area with the water, right?
Yes.
That's what he said.
Yes, in a good way, correct.
But how does that actually compare? I mean, we made a distinction between vegetables and trees. Vegetables, you don't walk there. Trees, you do walk there. How does this area of water now correlate to trees? Who's walking on water?
Okay,
unless you can take a boat out. I don't know, but
so again, we're gonna. No. You have to know. We're learning Gemara Rashi. Gemara Rashi is that unlike a pile, the kadiya of Peta, once produce is ready to be consumed, even though it's piled together and it takes up a large space, that is directly for people living. A planted area that still needs to be harvested, that's something that people don't do in residential area. You plant today, where do you plant? You plant out there in the fields. I'm not talking about a person for a hobby has a vegetable patch in their backyard. We're talking about people that you plant out there. That's not called dira. Makes sense. Water is different. Water is like harvested fruit. People need to drink. In every residential area, you will have ready food, ready water. That's the difference. So it's not, in other words, it's not only about whether you can walk there, even though you can't walk on water, but you need the water for your living purposes. Vegetables that are planted, you don't do that in a residential area. Storage, yeah, not planted. Okay, now let's put the picture back up. The beauty about these stories is that we have opportunities to mamish put together many dinim that we learned, a practical way of making a review, which is great. And here again, to appreciate, I keep on mentioning a city Eruv, because when people hear Karpav, even though normally Karpav, people think about, which is true normally, and outside the city area, but clearly that's not the case. So take a look, even if you don't have a picture, it's very simple. You have a Reshus Harabim that goes into a Mavli. Now the Mavli that it goes into, in our case, was not a Mavli Sasum. Was not a Mavi Sasum. If the Mavi is Sasum, which means if the back of the Mavi would have been closed with the halachic mechitza, all you would need in the front of the Mavi would be either a lechi or a kaida. However, when the Mavi is mefulash, we have that machlekes, we have Beishamai, Beisilal, all the different versions. Bottom line is that if one side has a tzuras HaPesach is a much better type of wall. So it's as if the tzuras HaPesach is an actual mechitza. And the case in our story is that there was a tzuras HaPesach by the Reshus Harabim. Now the other side is still open. So normally, what would you need? You would need to have a lechi or a kaida. Okay. Now hold on to that thought. If you don't have a lechi or a kaida, before there was a lechi or a kaida, the back of the mavi goes into a rechava. The case here again is the rechava. The rechava is adjacent to living area. But there were no homes open directly into this back lot. It was normally left for storage, and we determined a rechava as the status of shloi hukaf ladira. Now, the back lot was halachically partitioned. It doesn't mean it was closed like a box. It means that halachically, the openings to the mavui, and we'll see there was another path coming from it, was less than 10, was 10 amas or less. It was a halal of 10 or less. So that's called a Pesach. So if you look at a picture, the mavui is taka halachically close from full sides. Problem is the mavui, the back lot, the rechava, is an area yoysim beis osayim shaloi hukaf ladir, which is a problem because now that we are paskening that a karpav, even in a city, doesn't matter if it's closed off, shaloi hukaf ladira, you may not carry in it, and any adjacent property that's nifratz b'meloy oy l'toicha automatically becomes also prohibited to carry, because if you are standing in the mavi, right, if the mavi is fully open to the back lot, since you cannot carry in the back lot, you can't carry in the mavi. Now the story is not over yet. Now, if you can just picture in your mind, so you have a mavi that goes into a back lot. Now the back lot goes into a path, into a shvil. This shvil is going into water. Why are we? The reason why the water at the back of the shvil is important. The example is it's a path that leads you into Karamim, into vineyards, that goes to a lake or goes to a body of water. We're speaking about a case where we will use the lake as a mechitza that will serve as a wall for the back of the vineyard path. So the beauty here is that even though you would argue both the mavui and the shvil are open from both sides, halachically it's not the case. The mavui is halachically closed at the end, opening to the Reshus Harabim because there's a tzuras HaPesach. the path to the vineyard, the Shvil HaKramim, is halachically partitioned off because we're speaking about a lake that has a wall that goes down 10 tfachim, or there's an incline that's like a wall. So really the path only has one opening from the path into the back lot. The Mavi only has one opening from the Mavi into the back lot, but we got ourselves a problem. So let's read it inside. Ahi, Rechava, there was a back lot, the Havoi, the Pum Nahara that was in the city. This was an actual story in the city of Pum Nahara. The Chad Gisom, one side of the Rechava was open to a Masa. Guys, whenever we learn Masa, the city doesn't mean the backlot was open to the Rishus Harabim, as you see from the Rishonim. City means it was opened up to a Mavui that was opened up to the Rishus Harabim. And the Chad Gisom from the other side of the backlot, have a Pasiach, it was open, fully opened. Before we did anything, it was fully opened to a Shvil Shel Keramim, to a path of Keramim. And the path of Keramim wasn't Mefulash. How was it not Mefulash? Because it went, it went into a river, it went into a body of water that halachically, we will use that body as a wall to that side of the Shvil HaKeramim. Another important detail will be is that what are we learning over here? What's the whole sugya? The whole sugya is that you want to redesignate the backlot for residential purposes. Who would use the backlot? So the case here, which is important, is that there were houses inside the vineyard, and not only were the houses there, but there was an opening. They were able to easily get from their living area into the path of the vineyard, and they would want to use for their residential purposes some of the backlot. So they want to change the designation of the backlot into a place where it's Ladino, but as we learned today, it's not enough for you to decide, oh, I'm using the backlot Ladino. I'm using this area for residential purposes. Too late. Since when the wall around the backlot was built, it was built Shaloi Ladira, Hukaf Shaloi Ladira. It has the status of Karpaf Yesma Beso Sanj Ladira. You want to change it. What did we learn on Amud Aleph? You got to redo the wall. Now, one solution would be like we learned on Amud Aleph. Take the backlot, make a breach in a wall, or lengthen, make any opening more than 10, reclose it, and you're good to go. That would have been a solution. For whatever reason, they were looking for an easier solution. And we can just practically, it's always you have to break a wall is expensive. Is there an easier solution that we're going to say, now you built a wall? Once you built a wall with the new kavana that the people that are living in the vineyard will use the back lot for dira, so now you're good. So what do you need to do? So Amar Abaya says, hey, Chinav, let's analyze the options and see which options do we have to rule out. One solution is, let's build a new wall, but where are we going to build a new wall? We're going to build a new wall at the end of the Shvil HaKeramim. Now, when you go on that Shvil HaKeramim, you don't even see a wall, because a river or a body of water, the wall goes under the ground. It goes into the water. So let's build a wall over there. And what? And now that you are closing off the vineyard path, you're building a new wall, let us view the wall that you would build by the lake, by the water in the vineyard path as a wall for the Rechava. How is that a wall for the Rechava? Because since the Rechava opens up directly into the vineyard path, directly, there is nothing stopping it. There's no leche there, there's no kohen, there's nothing there. So let's view that wall as a wall for the backlot. Obviously, guys, we don't want to close the vineyard path to the backlot. The opposite. The people that live in the vineyard want to use the backlot, but build a wall on the other end. Here in the picture on the left end. And that wall should be a new wall that you're building for the backlot. And since you're doing it lekavana to use the backlot ledira, is that a solution? Says Abai, that's not a solution. Because that wall is not worth anything. Why is that? Because if you have a mechitza and you build on top of it another mechitza, you didn't do anything halachically. Once a wall is 10 tvachim tall or taller, it's called a mechitza. Just adding to it is not making something new. And guys, we're going to learn a lot about this rule, God willing, on Daf Chafei. But we're taking that as a given. So if building a wall at the end that goes into the lake is considered a wall on top of a wall, which it is, you didn't do anything. Another solution would be build a Tzuras HaPesach, not at the end of the Shvil HaKaramim that goes into the river, but at the other end, the end where the Shvil HaKaramim touches the Rechava. Why are you building a Tzuras HaPesach? By the way, that's even better. That's building a wall, mamish, by the Rechava. Now, hold on. There's a big chiddush here. One will argue, how will that Bechlal work? When is your re-enclosing considered a significant act? If prior to you re-enclosing, there is a breach. Here, the opening from the backlot to the Shvil HaKaramim, like the opening from the backlot to the Mavoi, is not more than 10 amas. If it's not more than 10 amas, then building a mechitza is nothing. So Rashi explains, no, it's not nothing. It's gavaldik. As of now, being that the backlot is still called hukav shaloi ledira, so you cannot carry in the backlot, de facto, automatically, by extension, any area that's nifratz bimaloyoi to it, you can also not carry there. So even though the vineyard path right now is enclosed from 3 sides, but since it's in one side fully open to the backlot, you can't carry in the vineyard path. Building a Tzuras HaPesach at the mouth of the vineyard path, the place where it touches the Rechava, that will be significant to make you be able to carry in the vineyard path itself, because now it's separated from the backlot. Now it's no longer Nifetz V'Maloyah. So Abai is really being machadish that even though the pirza, the opening between the vineyard path and the Rechava, is not more than 10 amas, however, since the Tzuras HaPesach is halachically significant for the Shvil HaKaramim, so once it's considered you built a wall that changed halachic status for the better, now we can consider this a new wall that you built for the backlot, for the Rechava, which is great. And since you are doing that big havana that from now on you're going to be using the backlot for residential purposes for the people that live in the vineyard, so that should be a solution. So Zabaya, it's a halachically good solution, but practically it's not a good solution. Here you see how a Rav has to be down to earth. So even though that theoretically it would work, however, no, asu gamle shavyanle, any Tzuras HaPesach, even though you could theoretically build it very tall, but just putting a string, koydem mikan v'koydem al gabov, people would, there is water there. People in the city, people in the Reshus Harabim would commonly go through the Mavui, go through the backlot, go through the Shvil HaKaramim with their animals, for the animals to drink by the river, and a tall animal like a gomel will just technically, he'll knock down the Tzuras HaPesach. So it's a halachically good solution, but it's not practical. Here is what the solution is. All you need to do is build a lechi where the vineyard path touches the Rechava. Why are you building a lechi? We're building a lechi to separate the vineyard path from the backlot. We don't want the vineyard part to be nifratz b'maloy l'mekayim ha'asrloi. And here we're using the same logic that we just mentioned regarding the Tzuras HaPesach. The width of the vineyard path is not more than 10 amas. It doesn't matter. But before you did anything, not only may you not carry in the backlot, you may not carry in the shvil because it's open to the backlot. So this lechi, the migui, the mahanya, l'shvil shel karamim, it's considered a partition to now allow the people that live in the vineyard to carry from their vineyard area into the path area. So once that lechi is an effective mechitza, we can also view this as a mechitza for the backlot. And what did we learn in Amud Aleph? That's the klal, that if you change the designation of an area, you want to use it ledira, just that intention is not enough. You got to build a wall. This is enough of a wall to say, I built a wall. That's Abai. Amalei Rava to Abaye, I don't agree with you. Why? He was afraid of something. Because Yoimru, people that are in the Reshus Harabim, they see through the Mavui, they see into the backlot. To them, it looks like the Shvil HaKaramim is a shvil that is open in both ends. They don't see the wall at the end of the vineyard path, even though the water is a halachic wall. But it looks like it's a path that's open from both ends. When a path is open from both ends, when a mavui is open from both ends, just putting a lechi on one side is never sufficient. But if that will allow them to carry, yoimru lechi moyel shloshal keramim the alma. We're speaking about a shvil of keramim that has no river at the end. It was common for you to have paths through a vineyard. So because of that chashash, even though theoretically it should work, he has a different solution. What's the other solution? It's very similar.
Rabbi.
Yes.
According to what Rabbi is saying here, any mavui that has a one of the walls as, let's say, a water bank, right, and the other two are full walls, he would not allow using a lechi or a kaira in the front, right?
If people didn't hear. Not when do you have water at one end of the mavui, so people who are in the front entrance, they can see the water easily. In our case, it's unique because the water is so far away from the front of the street because it's a mavui, then a rechava, which is more than 2 sasayim, then a vineyard path. It's too far away. No, he got to breathe. So therefore, you'll see from his solution how this responds to your question. Build a lechi. Pischa de Masra again doesn't mean you don't need the pictures. That's fine. Okay, exactly where the arrow is. The place where the mavi touches the street is a Tzuras HaPesach. But as long as you build the same concept, put a lechi at the other end of the mavi. Mavi rechava. Why do you need a lechi? Like we mentioned. Why? What did we mention? That the mavi, because of the Tzuras HaPesach, is closed from 3 sides, but it's fully opened. You cannot carry in the mavi. The moment you only put up a lechi, that separates the mavi from the rechava. Now that was effective in allowing you to carry in the mavi. So once this is considered a wall that allows you to carry for the mavi, even though it's just a lechi, it's considered a new wall that you build for the backlot. And now the kavana of you having the people that live in the vineyard use the backlot is effective. So now the rechava becomes, it's very important this, the rechava becomes a place in which you can carry. So now the vineyard path is open to a place in which you could carry. The vineyard path is closed from 3 sides. The vineyard path doesn't even need a lechi at all. There's no problem over here. The backlot is a living extended area for the people that live in the vineyard. So it's when you have an area that's closed from 3 sides, but it's open to the Rishus Harabim, that's where you need to have a lechi or a koida. And for sure, Tzuras HaPesach is avadi good. But here you don't need anything because it's not open to a Rishus Harabim. The vineyard part is only open to a rechava. Let's read it inside. And now he'll kach, and therefore is taltule b'masa gufa shari. You can carry in the mavi. Masi doesn't mean the city. It means you can carry in the area that's adjacent to the city. Taltula b'rechava is vaited gufa shari. You can carry in the rechava because this lechi is also now viewed as a new wall that you built for the rechava. However, mimasa l'rechava, from the backlot, from the mavui into the backlot, or from the rechava, or from the backlot into the mavui, can you carry between these 2 properties? Now, what would be the issue? The issue is that we keep on mentioning this. That's why the picture, they show you the houses that are going to use the backlot are in the kramim. When you have 2 chatzeros that are adjacent to each other, for them to be allowed to both share a common area, you got to make a shit of bovais. So the backlot is part of the people that live in the kerem. So now maybe for them to go from the masa, from the mavui, right, into the rechava, or from the rechava into the mavui, you can argue maybe you can't do that. Why can you not do that? Because they're going from an area that is primarily being used by the vineyard people, and they didn't make a shift to mavois. So pliga about Ravacha v'Ravina, one says us and one says mutter. Let's go to Daf Chaf Hey, and the Gemara explains, man disharei, why would you be allowed? When do you need to have a shift of mavois? If 2 chatzeros are going from a chatzar into a mavi, my chatzar into a mavi, your chatzar into a mavi, no one is actually living in the backlot. Gavaldik. even though we are saying it's hukaf now lidira, but no one is directly going into the backlot. There isn't any Pesach from the Kerem directly into, there's a path. So you go from the houses into the path into the backlot. Since the Leked Yoirin, look inside the Rashi, Sheyei Osru al Bnei Mavui, Hilkach Reshus Bnei HaMavui Hu, Ubnei Shfil Loi Osri Halo. Wow, they don't answer each other. The Havak Chatzer Ketana, here's the Gedoyla Muteres Viktana Asura, Ushvil Loi Misaknin only. Oh, very good. So Rav explains why. Rav says that since, remember, Rav has a gzeira. Rav holds that you cannot walk in the vineyard path. That's the word. Danny, the head, you can't walk in the vineyard. You can't carry, the Bnei Akramim cannot carry in the vineyard path. Why not? Because people in the street don't see that far that there's a river in the bottom. So it looks like it's opened. So since, that's the word, since the people in the vineyard path may not actually carry in that path, so there's no way they can come into the backlot on Shabbos. It's called residential for the weekdays. So since they are usher to go into the backlot yard, so therefore we can say that there's only the mavui and the backlot, and they can carry from one place to the other. Gavaldik. It's amazing. So even though their chav is becoming, so to say, residential for the people that live in the vineyard, so what? But since, according to Rava's Gezeda, they may not go in there because they can't even go on the vineyard path. Why can't they go on the vineyard path? Because it looks like it's opened from people that live in the Rishus Harabim. So they can. So you can't say the back lot is being used by two groups. It's not. However, Manda Asar, because Zimrin the Hava by the Yurin, it could be that sooner or later the people that live in the vineyard will make a hole of Pesach directly from the wall that encloses their homes directly into the backlot, circumventing the need to go through the vineyard path. So you might have a time where they're going to go directly into the backlot. The moment that happens, then if the houses that live in the vineyard and the Bnei Mavui don't make a shituf, then the backlot is an area from it to the Mavui, from it to the Kedem, you may not go. So never carry. That was a good chazar of many dinim that we learned together. Any questions?
Yeah, first of all, I don't see how the first objection to Abaye's solution of putting a tzuras HaPesach, because the camels might knock it down. How does that make sense? When you have a tzuras HaPesach at the beginning of the Mavui. So if a tzuras HaPesach is not good because of camels, our whole case is that there's one of the enclosures, right at the front of the Mavui, between the Mavui and the Shus Harabim, is the tzuras HaPesach. So if there's camels that are knocking down the tzuras HaPesach, that would affect the very front.
You're asking a very good but a technical question. So I'm going to give you a technical answer. That the walls to the Mavui must have been very tall, and they made a very big effort to build a tremendously high tzuras HaPesach, and they're trying to avoid that. I have another question. What was the whole issue? We learned on Amud Aleph, all you need to do is you need to break the wall, Yoiser Me'esen, and reclose it. So do that. Oh, they're trying to find the easier solution.
Well, the notes here said that the wall was a stone wall. So it was a big tircha to break it down.
So I want to say about the height. It must have been that the wall in the front by the Rishus Harabim was very tall. So for them to make a tzuras HaPesach, it was taka higher than the camel. In the back, it wasn't that tall. So to make a big tzuras HaPesach is also difficult.
Right, so why not? The solution should be just make a high tzuras HaPesach. I mean,
because making a lechi is much easier. All right, Chevra. I get Shabbos.
Good Shabbos. Sunday.
Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.